Some of the bizarreness I really appreciated. Man, I don't know what I think of this film.
It was disturbing beginning to end.
It's a great setup for a really strange story. It had such potential and then just takes a path that I didn't really like. So it kind of lost me at that point.
I would not recommend it as a date film. It could be awkward at times.
This may not be your cup of tea.
If you're looking for kind of an odd film, highly stylized, good performances.
It's everything you love and everything you hate about an independent film all rolled into one. You've been forewarned. I'm Heath Firestone with Cinema Technica.
And I'm Mark Loftus with Post Magazine. And in this podcast, we're going to look at the new Searchlight Pictures dark comedy, Poor Things, starring Emma Stone as Bella Baxter, a young woman who's brought back to life from the brink of death by the brilliant and daring scientist, Dr. Godwin Baxter, who's played by Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, this is an interesting film. It's really weird, I guess, what you kind of come to expect from Yorgos. But like, I'm going to go a little bit of a spoiler, but they reveal this very early in the film. But I think it's important to talk about some of this. It mentions about Bella Baxter, who's brought back to life. In fact, she committed suicide and had an unborn baby in her, whose brain was still viable while hers was not. So the mad scientist, Dr. Frankenstein type of character played by Willem Dafoe, Godwin, ends up replacing the woman's brain with the infant brain. And so it's a great setup for a really strange story, which I found that aspect really interesting.
Yeah, this film was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and it definitely has that Frankenstein type of theme to it, a little bit of a twist on it. Do we want to look at some of the footage before we get into it?
Yeah.
This is Bella. Bella, this is Mr. McCandles. She's an experiment.
Good evening.
Her brain and her body are not quite synchronized. But she's progressing at an accelerated pace.
Tell me, where did she come from?
I shall. For it is a happy tale.
I am Bella Baxter, and there is a world to enjoy, circumnavigate. I must go punch that baby.
All right, so that gives you a taste of kind of the bizarre style of this film.
So this film is actually based on a novel by Alistair Gray. He's Scottish, and the book is told from many different viewpoints. But in the film, we kind of see it through Bella's eyes. So Bella, as you had mentioned, is this reincarnated young woman with the mind of a child, her, yet to be born child at that point, who is kind of an experiment by Willem Dafoe's character, Dr. Godwin Baxter, who is a traumatized scientist in his own right. Do you want to talk about Bella or Dr. Baxter?
Sure. Well, the whole story is kind of this unusual approach to things, kind of, I don't know, Burton-esque, but darker, twisted. You have this mad scientist. Obviously, it's a twist on the original Dr. Frankenstein idea, except in this case, Dr. Frankenstein is the one who's all stitched together and grossly misformed and everything, which you eventually find out is because of experiments that were conducted on him by his father, who founded a medical college and used his son as his experiments. But it was an interesting twist on that. Willem Dafoe's character is interesting, initially very arrogant and likes people to refer to him as God and makes jokes about him being God. And I guess not really all that likable initially, but he actually has a character arc. He actually develops, and you actually grow to care for him and kind of like him probably more than some of the other characters, in my opinion.
That's true, because you don't really know what his circumstances are, why he's so disfigured. Initially, he's wearing obviously a lot of prosthetics in the film, makeup and special effects there. And you think that he does have this God complex, like I'm bringing life to this. And then Bella, you kind of think, is he a doctor that's taking advantage of this young, beautiful woman? But really, that wasn't by the design. It was just circumstantial that he would to come upon her, when she had died.
Yeah, like I say, to me, I found him to be probably the most interesting character myself. which probably a lot of people don't necessarily consider that. But, like I say, if a character has an arc, his, to me, was kind of a subtle arc, but, kind of more interesting. I liked him, or I grew to like him, I guess, in a weird way, especially as you learn his backstory and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
There are a couple of other characters that are important in it. Rami Youssef plays Max McCandless, and he's a kind of what they describe as a poor, disheveled student who's essentially in awe of the professor, and he's hoping to learn whatever he can from him, and the professor brings him into his home so that he can study Bella's development and make notes of it, totally from a scientific standpoint of how she's developing. And that provides some of the interesting and weird scenarios in that first act.
Well, right. And this is where we actually get introduced to Bella, who's, basically an infant in a full grown woman's body. But also she's developing very quickly intellectually, and in some ways, I guess her hair grows an inch a week or something like that. And so you see her hair get longer throughout the film, which I think is supposed to give some sort of indication of how much time has passed. But initially she's this, and for actually a lot of the film, she's this kind of not coordinated, just kind of stumbling around. And so there's a lot of physical performance that goes into this and a lot of childlike aspects to it. So like I said, there's a great setup for a strange story. If you're enjoying this, consider liking and subscribing. Also check out cinematechnica.com.
Check out postmagazine.com.
Mark, you talked to a lot of people behind the scenes, including the director. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had a chance to speak with Yorgos Lanthimos about this film. Just a little bit of background. He worked on The Favorite, which was nominated for 10 Academy Awards. Olivia Colman actually won the Academy Award. Emma Stone appeared in that film, as did his cinematographer, Robbie Ryan, his editor, Yorgos Mavrosaridis. So he's built like this troupe of talent that is now working on this film. But he's also brought in people that he hasn't worked with to kind of expand his creative vision. And in this case, the production designers, Shona Heath and James Price, were responsible for creating the look of this film, as well as the composer, Jerskin Fendrix, who's somebody he had never worked with before. In fact, he had never worked with a composer in the past, and Jerskin had never composed for film. So just a little bit of an interesting background on the talent pool that he put together to create Poor Things.
There was also interesting use of cameras and lenses and color schemes. It starts out, the first scene is this, she's in this brilliant blue dress, as she commits suicide. And then it cuts to black and white, and it's black and white for several minutes after that, several minutes. And then eventually, as I think she goes out into her experiences, her first actual experiences outside of the home, which is a very protected environment, I think is the first time we actually start to see some color brought back into the film. So weird angles, a lot of, you described it, Mark, didn't you say as kind of a, I don't know, how did you describe it?
Well, I had a chance to. Yeah, it was unsettling. It was disturbing. It was intentional. I feel that it was intentional because you're dealing with the whole concept of a Frankenstein and a reanimation of a dead person there. And in addition to director Yorgos, I got to speak with his cinematographer, Robbie Ryan, who's worked with him on past projects. And I asked him about the development of the film and how it kind of evolves. And he really attributes that to the script, Yorgos' script, and Tony McNamara, who was also one of the script writers for it. And he said that when they shot the film, they shot it out of sequence. So they didn't shoot it in a linear format from beginning to end. They shot it with whatever set was available at that time. And then they got as much as they could for the needs of that set. And then the set was taken down and they build another set and they shoot that sequence as much as they can. So it's kind of like all of these blocks that are then put together. And, he may be shooting color, he may be shooting black and white, he may be shooting, the Ektachrome film in some of the sequences. Some of it was on a LED stage, some of it was on a stage with curtains. And then when it's put together in editorial and you feel it evolving, that he credits with the script, but not so much with the cinematography, shooting it with the idea of it is going to go through this evolution. So I thought that was kind of interesting from a production standpoint. A lot of these sets were obviously all of the sets were created through production design, this weird world, kind of like a Charles Dickens steampunk London 1920s type of era there.
Yeah, Victorian. Yeah, there's definitely a steampunk element. This is definitely an alternate universe as well, because obviously things, I mean, any steampunk really is, but there's, they're not trying to adhere to any reality. It's just based in this time, and
the time period is vague, but you do get the impression that it is back at that period there. And again, Yorgos was saying that when he envisioned this film from the book, because I said, when you read a book, 100 people could read a book. You could have 100 different visual interpretations of what this book is going to become when you turn it into a film. And he said, first thing he thought was that this is a world that has to be created. It's not something that we could go out and shoot on location. This world doesn't exist. And that's where production design comes in. And they create these sets. They create these giant curtain backdrops. A couple of the scenes were shot using an LED stage where they have, for example, the front hull of the ship. They're on a ship at some point. And in the background, you see this beautiful like sunset, pink skies, and he said he used that LED setup because he needed both movement and motion. He needed the movement of the boat and he needed the motion of the waves in the ocean. So that's why they did that for a couple of the scenes. But again, this was all created. This world was created on a stage through production design. And it does give you that very unsettling feeling, especially up in the early stages of the film.
Well, and like I said, you start out with a really vibrant shot, then you go to black and white for a long time. Then when it first introduces some of the color, it seems like mostly she's that central element that's actually being colorized. And then there's some scenes in some places where it almost looked like that colorized film, like it was shot black and white and they added the color afterwards. And then there was some of those really vibrant, almost oversaturated colors, kind of a Technicolor or but exaggerated Technicolor. And so they were definitely playing with the palette throughout the entire thing, and the lenses. Some of the lenses were really interesting, cool. Some of them were just weird. They had a lot of kind of fisheye where it's actually black for most of the screen, but just a round fisheye. Yeah, you're looking through a peephole or telescope or something. Those I didn't like that much, but they're trying to be weird. And
it was by design. They did shoot on 3 different stocks. They shot on color film, they shot on Ektachrome, and they shot on black and white. So the black and white footage you saw was true black and white. It's not like it was shot on color and converted to black and white. It was actually shot on black and white. But yes, all of these different components to give you the different looks at different times.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those very stylized films. It's bizarre. The whole thing's bizarre. Some of the bizarreness I really appreciated. Like they have, they're playing with the Dr. Frankenstein thing. So they have running around. You see a dog running around with a goose head, neck and head, I think it is, or a duck, I don't remember. And then later you see a chicken's body with a pug's head on it. So kind of like those mashups that people do on, I don't know, Instagram or whatever, where you combine animals, but these ones are stitched together, and it's fun.
And I guess that goes to the whole idea that he is this Dr. Frankenstein type character that is working with what he has. And when Bella comes along, it's, a perfect scenario for him to try this reanimation idea that I guess he had, is able to fulfill. And later on in the film, you find out that there's a 2.0 version. I think Margaret Qualley is the actress that plays Felicity, which is the next attempt at doing this human reanimation. So that theme follows throughout the film.
Before we get too far into this, I want to say I thought the setup for this was really interesting. It was bizarre. It's not for everybody. I do have to warn anybody who might be thinking about going to this film. This film is not for everybody. Honestly, this is, as much as I kind of liked some of the setup and stuff, this is not my type of film at all. Especially, I like I like the first act. I pretty much hated the second act, which I'm sure is not a popular opinion. And then it kind of redeemed itself a little bit in the third act, but it had such potential as where it could go, and then just takes a path that I didn't really like. We'll talk more about that later, but before we got too far into this, I wanted to let people know this may not be your cup of tea, for a lot
Yeah,
of reasons.
I saw this film back over the summer. Initially, this film was going to be released much sooner than its December 8th, I guess, date that they're talking about. So I've seen it quite a while ago and have been kind of thinking about it. And I told you a little bit about it. And I said it is an odd, disturbing film. There are elements to it that are just intentionally unsettling. It's the camera angle, it's the music, it's that clunky music that is kind of dissonant and showing that Bella is this Frankenstein type character who is not able to walk, the way that a normal person would, and just her behavior is weird and everything. And I think the music underscores that as well, of it just being unsettling. The camera angles, like you said, the peephole aspect of some of the fisheye lens and stuff. So there's really an effort there to create that. And then it does smooth out where it's a little more pleasant. The sets are a little more beautiful. Like I said, the sunset and everything is a lot more appealing looking. Emma Stone, it's a real challenging role for her because she has to play this underdeveloped, character. She has to play an adult. She's naked in quite a few of the scenes. It's not a film I would recommend a first date on because you may feel uncomfortable during some of these sequences. It's definitely not the perfect date film, but it's an interesting film and it's something that you may want to think about, like just some of the stories and the themes in it.
I mean, some people there absolutely loved it. At the end of the thing, there were people applauding and that sort of thing. I was not one of them, not just because it wasn't my thing. I got out of the film. I'm like, man, I don't know what I think of this film. I mean, there are certain elements I liked and certain elements I really did not like at all. And, probably the things I found disturbing was less the weird, awkward stuff and more some of the themes and how they were approached them. And and we'll explain more later. But yeah, a lot of people I think will actually have problem with some of the themes and where it goes with it.
Yeah, there was another character that we haven't talked about yet, portrayed by Mark Ruffalo, and his character's name is Duncan Wedderburn, and he plays this slick lawyer who kind of realizes that Bella is this beautiful young woman and somewhat naive because she's got this childlike brain, and he exhibits this predatory behavior where he's going to take her and show her the world because she really needs to know what the world is like before she settles down and gets married. And it is like I said, a predatory.
He's about as creepy and smarmy and I don't know, just like, just as slimy of a character as you can imagine. Totally a caricature, and you could tell that Mark Ruffalo was really enjoying playing this character. It was actually kind of funny how bad he was. You kind of love to hate him, and as the movie progresses and terrible things kind of happen to him, you're enjoying the fact that he's being tortured.
Absolutely. Because he is approaching this like, I'm a smart lawyer and this woman is very vulnerable and I'm going to exploit that as much as I can. And initially he does, but then Bella has her own awakening there and realizes that she can't be controlled by this one person. And that infuriates him. It frustrates him and it infuriates him that he's not able to maintain control over her. Obviously, he's got a certain amount of misogynistic tendencies, and it really sets him on a path of kind of self-destruction and leads us into the...
She destroys him,
Yeah.
There is a theme throughout this whole thing of that basically everybody is trying to control her, which, I get, but, and it kind of gets complicated at that point too, because I had a really hard time separating the mental age of her character with what was happening to her. There's supposed to be this whole progression of her discovering her sexuality and being free of the, I guess, societal norms as to what's acceptable sexually, and it's supposed to be her just exploring this whole thing. But the part that, I mean, we're all shaped by our own experiences in life, or we interpret things through that lens. And for me, like, and this other people might have the same problem. I actually had some jobs when I was younger where I worked with people with different intellectual disabilities. And it really bothered me to find out that some of them it was common for them to be taken advantage of by people with average intelligence, really taking advantage of them. And here I'm looking at this, and she's stumbling around. She's maybe intellectually a toddler. She's still learning words and doesn't understand concepts like money and these different things. Yet she's exploring everything sexually in a way that just, to me, I found really disturbing, because I couldn't see her just as that woman. I saw her as this intellectual child, and if that happened to a child, it's horrific, you know.
Yeah,
she doesn't have the development to be able to understand, you know. And so to me, it wasn't about her experiencing this sexual, exploration. It was about, there's a reason that children have to go through certain developmental stages before they start having these other urges. And, and that sort of thing, because they need to have the tools to be able to deal with that. And she was kind of neglected even throughout. They set up some of this. It was interesting how deliberate a lot of this really was. Is you see her in the very beginning just dropping plates and just breaking things and all this, and she's never ever corrected by anybody saying, "Hey, don't do that. You shouldn't do that."
There's no consequences for her behavior. Yep.
Yeah, none. And so she's raised in this environment where, nobody gets mad at her. Nobody tells her not to do this. There's no guidance whatsoever.
She does evolve, though, because she does have this sexual awakening. She realizes that she likes having sex. She can't understand why people aren't having sex all the time. She doesn't have that societal understanding there. So she's having sex with, different people. And then later on in the film, she ends up going to work at a brothel. And I think she figures, okay, well, I need the money, but it'll also be fun. And she realizes that the customers aren't really fun, that it is a job and it's not appealing and stuff. So I think she learns over that period as well. So there is a progression to her and an evolution to her, and her sexual revolution or evolution does change over time, where she was doing it from enjoyment and then power and then for work, and maybe realizes that it's not as liberating as maybe she thought it was.
Right. Well, and the thing is, throughout this, pretty much everybody she runs into is trying to take advantage of her in one way or another. Not all of them sexually. There is the woman on the ship who was kind of a mentor to her, actually exposed her to books and helped develop her intellectual side of things. And that sort of thing, not just learning through experience, but learning through literature and that sort of thing, which was a positive influence. But and
even the woman on the ship, her travel companion there, kind of told Bella that not everybody is a nice person. There are people out there that do nasty things, that try to harm people and stuff. So he said he kind of let her know that, don't be so naive. There are nasty people out there that will take advantage of you. And that was kind of the first time she really had somebody giving her any kind of guidance on just societal interactions.
Well, earlier in the story, you had Max, the assistant, who we've only touched on briefly, but he's actually one of the positive influences on her. He a couple times guides her, says, that's not socially acceptable to do this. But then they spend the rest of the story, everybody saying that polite society will ruin you. And so they kind of spend this whole thing saying, we shouldn't have these restrictions, that all this is part of the, people trying to control you, kind of the
societal expectations. Yeah.
And so it's supposed to be this refreshing look at it, but the problem was, for most of this, even part of the time that she was working in the brothel, she was still maybe at a toddler level of intellect, or a young child. Anyway, doing these things that nothing like that should ever be experienced by a child. And I say, if you can get past that, I guess you're fine. I couldn't get past that. It just bothered me the entire time.
Heath, so again, this looks at societal expectations, but there's also a psychological aspect to it. Is that something you want to talk about?
Well, yeah. So I was reading some other people's reviews, and it's mostly like really positive reviews. And I'm like, man, I'm definitely in the minority on this. And but rather than just saying about all the little things that I liked about this film, I probably ended up spending a lot more time thinking about what it was that I didn't like about this film and why, and which things I found disturbing that other people didn't seem to have an issue with. And so I started delving into psychology because that's something I'm really fascinated with anyway, and have done a lot of research in the past on. And I noticed some things, that are set up throughout, like before I mentioned the fact that there wasn't any restrictions to her. There was no guidance, which is a form of neglect, really. A developing mind needs to have some sort of guidance or it's going to kind of go off the rails. And we see some weird, we see some things that are actually pointing to what they call antisocial, personality type of traits and stuff, which might indicate that somebody has a tendency towards either psychopathy or sociopathy. With children, it's a lot of times if they torture, small animals or that sort of thing. And there's a scene where she's first brought out into the world, and Max is trying to show her something she's never seen before. He's like, "Come here," and he opens up his hands, and he has a toad, I believe it is, a frog or toad. And she's like, "Oh, cool." And she's like, "Kill it." He's like, "No." And then she's like, so he covers it, and she takes her hands and goes and squishes it between his hands, and he opens up and he's looking on in horror, and she's like delighted and just, laughing and thought that was the greatest thing, and it's like, normal little kids don't do that. Maybe with insects, but not with usually larger,
Right.
Animals and stuff. And, and we see some other things where there's just suggestions that there, and so this is kind of where we get a little bit into psychology when you talk about, sociopathy in particular. With psychopaths, they generally say that they're born, and they say that sociopaths are made. And one of the ways that sociopaths are made are by neglect, by brain damage, which she could have had that from the surgery and stuff. But also, without a framework to help figure out what's okay to do and what's not. You'll have this tendency not to realize that anything that you do is wrong, or anything like that. And so while there's this certain, they play it off as this innocence, it's also sets up for everything's about instant gratification throughout this entire thing. And we know that the ability to have delayed gratification is one of your biggest indicators of future success in life, because so many things benefit from being able to put off instant gratification for a better long-term result. And this whole story was embracing that whole instant gratification, instant whatever, without the development of any, of the skills that you ultimately need to succeed in life, I guess. And there's going to be long-term, negative psychological implications of this. I don't know. So I guess maybe I couldn't just accept it as this happy-go-lucky explore your sexuality thing, because I'm seeing it as this little kid who never had the stuff, is not being given the tools to develop into a healthy social being.
Well, even early on, while Emma or Bella is growing up in Dr. Baxter's home, there is a maid that's kind of following her around and, picking up the broken plates that she decides to destroy. And I think at one point she wets herself, like, right there in the dining room and stuff. And nobody is directing her to say, like, okay, if you need to use the restroom, you do that. If you want to break a plate, that's not okay. We're not just going to give you. So early on, there was no direction from her. Even though there was a maid cleaning up after her, there was nobody telling her, hey, stop doing that. The maid was just, okay, I'm cleaning up these broken plates and stuff. And that does go on throughout it. So yeah, there is a lack of consequence. And then later on in the film, we realize that Dr. Baxter is trying this again with another reanimation. And if you read the production notes and you learn, Dr. Baxter didn't intentionally have feelings for Bella, but there were feelings that grew over time. And in this next iteration,
paternal feelings,
with Felicity, he is intentionally not going to become emotionally involved at all. So you would have to think that Felicity is going to be in even worse situation, because she'll have far less oversight or direction there. Really just a science experiment of observation, but really no guidance.
Yeah. The thing is, it's not a good idea to let kids completely go off on their own with no direction. That's why you end up with stuff like Lord of the Flies. I've seen that with scouts stuff before. Kids need some direction. We want them to experience life and learn on their own, but they also still need some guidance, or they're just not going to, it's going to be more challenging for them in life in general. So I don't know. It's, like I say, the second act is all about stuff that I just couldn't appreciate in the same way that other people were, because I saw too many things wrong with it, psychologically, and I don't know. So I found it more disturbing than the kind of weird discordant stuff in the first act that you were initially talking about being kind of unsettling. I found.
Yeah. Understood. So I saw this film back over the summer. I got to see it at a private screening at Paramount's private screening room in New York City. And there were only 4 or 5 people there, members of the press. So I really didn't get any kind of reaction after the film as far as what the audience's take on it was. But Heath, you saw it at a pre-screening like fan event. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I didn't know. I knew it was an early screening, but I couldn't find any screenings before the 14th, and it comes out on the 18th anywhere in Colorado, or at least where I'm at, which is in the Denver area. And so I went to a theater that was completely packed. It was sold out. And when I went in, there was actually a goodie bag, with some special sunglasses and a bunch of postcards in it. And so I got to see how people actually reacted to it. And these are fans, obviously. And at the very end, I would say probably a third of the people, cheered or clapped or whatever, I wasn't one of those, just because, I didn't know how I felt, but I definitely didn't feel like clapping for it, I guess. No offense to the film, it was interesting. It just wasn't my thing.
Interesting. Yeah. At least you got to experience some of the audience reaction that I didn't get in my, private screening, because it was such a small handful of people.
Yeah, the people there seem to enjoy it. I think they're fans of Yorgos in the first place, and I heard some strange comments. Like the people next to me said, "Oh, I was hoping she was going to kill somebody." I'm like, "What? What?"
Yeah.
So, Mark, do you have any final thoughts regarding this film?
Yeah, I do. I came out of this film. I hadn't seen a whole lot of Emma Stone's films prior to this, and I came out of this film as a fan of her acting. That doesn't happen that often, where you see a film and you really are enamored with the skill. I can think of 2 or 3 other cases where it's happened to me personally. One was Natalie Portman in Closer, which, if you haven't seen that film, it's really a mentally draining film on it. And another one was Amanda Seyfried in Mank. Again, not somebody that I was familiar with. And when I saw the film and came out of it, I was like, man, that was a really good performance. And I felt the same way with Emma Stone on this one. It was not an easy role to play, because you're essentially exposing yourself. You're playing just disturbing aspects of it. You're really opening yourself up for, the entire audience to see about you. And I don't know. I came out of it with like more respect. I'd be interested in seeing some of her other work going forward. In fact, I know that director Yorgos is working with her, with Robbie Ryan, with a whole team, Willem Dafoe, on his next project, which is called Kind of Kindness. And the idea is that it's, I guess, 3 different acts with 5 actors and actresses in it, and they play a different part in each of those different acts. But again, partnering with a familiar team that he's worked with over time now. So I'm looking forward to seeing that down the road. And again, this film, it wasn't a happy film. You don't come out of it with a resolve at the end where you feel like, oh, mission accomplished, things worked out the way they should, and I feel good about it. It was disturbing beginning to the end. The disturbing aspect maybe wasn't as much unsettling, because you do feel a little vindication there, but I'd leave it at that. How about yourself, Heath? What are your final thoughts on this? I really had to kind of like tell you a little bit about it, having sat on this film for so long myself, and was kind of saying, yeah, this is, go into it with this type of attitude. So I'm curious, like, what your final thoughts are.
You did give me a little bit of warning, which is good. You need to be aware going into this film that it is disturbing, and like I say, it might not be your cup of tea. She is naked for like the entire second act, pretty much. And that's, that doesn't matter one way or another, but there's a lot of gratuitous, sex scenes and stuff and it really focuses on that for pretty much the entire second act. Kind of from a voyeuristic viewpoint, in my opinion. So I don't go for that. That's not my thing. So I didn't really like that aspect. At the end, I said it earlier. I said it kind of redeemed itself. In kind of coming back to what it was, I thought there was too much focus on this her sexual evolution, which I have no problem with that with a grown woman, but when it's basically a child's mind for at least half of that time, it was just hard for me to separate those two things, and I think it will be for a lot of people, honestly. So it kind of lost me at that point, and then it came back around at the end. So yeah, interesting film, made me think a lot, but definitely not my type of film, and I would certainly warn anybody that it's going to have a lot of stuff you may not be comfortable with, and so you've been forewarned.
Yeah, I respect that. I mean, if you're looking for kind of an odd film, highly stylized, good performances by everybody involved in it, I don't think I would criticize anybody as much as Mark Ruffalo's character was a real slimy character. He was good at portraying a slimy character, although his motives you would kind of, look down upon. I would not recommend it as a date film, as I said in the past, just because it could be awkward at times. But I'm glad I saw it, and I think that later in the year or early January, when the Oscar nominations come out, I wouldn't be surprised if this got some recognition because of the stylization, because of the camera work, because of Emma Stone's performance on it, because of the directing. I'm interested to see how it's received in the coming weeks.
Well, and I do want to say, with regard to the acting, Emma Stone did do a great job. It's a very physically demanding role, and challenging, I'm sure, to I guess, make yourself so exposed and that sort of thing. She did a good job of embodying a lot of those things. So Willem Dafoe's character, I thought, was really interesting because he actually had a unique arc, and you actually care for him, even though he's kind of messed up, but you kind of realize why he's messed up. And, Max is a likable character as well, and like I say, you love to hate Mark Ruffalo's character. So it's there were definitely interesting characters, and like I say, there's aspects of the film I really liked, and aspects of the film I really didn't like. When I was describing it to my wife, she's like, so basically, it's everything you love about an independent film and everything you hate about an independent film all rolled into one. I'm like, yes, that's a great description.
Wow.
And like I say, I think you might, some people are going to really enjoy this film. It just wasn't for me, because I couldn't separate myself. So, but, there you have it.
Thanks again, Heath. Heath, I'm glad we finally had a chance to talk about this film. Like I said, I've been kind of sitting on it for a couple of months now, waiting for you to see it and getting your reaction. So I appreciate you inviting me once again onto the Cinema Technica podcast.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Also, there was one little section I want to talk about, the spoilers, but we left it for the very end here. So if you don't want any ending spoilers, you might click away now. Otherwise, stick around for another couple minutes.
So Heath, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the spoilers here, maybe some of the ending. Is there a specific aspect you want to cover?
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to cover was at the very ending, Willem Dafoe's character is dying of cancer, and it's kind of sad. And she ends up meeting her father/husband, because the brain swap and everything, who is a terrible, terrible guy. He ends up getting shot, and he's bleeding to death. And there's this, she doesn't want him to die, and so she calls in Max to help her perform surgery or bring him back to the house. And he's like, but if you let this guy come back, because he's a really terrible person, he's like, he won't let this go. Basically, he'll make sure that he kills them, because he had trapped her. And anyway, but so you're thinking, wait a minute. And she's like, yes, I don't want him to die, but I think he could use some improvement. And I thought, that's right. She's got a perfect body. Maybe she can transfer, Godwin's brain into this body,
Right. Younger
so
body.
Then we go to this. They go back, save him or whatever. And then Godwin's dying. You're like, okay, I guess they're going to let him die, but before his brain shuts down, they transfer it in or something like that. And he dies, and they're just lying there next to him. And you're like, oh, that's what's happening. So at the end, she's in the courtyard, kind of being catered to, and you see the husband, father, and he's running around apparently with the brain of a goat in him. And you're like, what? What?
Right. Yeah, it was definitely a twist that you didn't expect. You thought that maybe Dr. Baxter was going to continue on. He would get a younger body. He'd be able to continue his work, and that's where it's leading, you would think. And then there's a total reversal, and that's not what happened. I appreciate you inviting me once again onto the Cinema Technica podcast.
Thanks, Mark.